So that was me, Hans, and we've been doing a study together with another museum about how to engage volunteers in collection work. So this is my museum. I like to call it my museum. It's not really, but I think of it as my museum. You probably have never heard about it. It's a very small museum. We're in Aarhus, Denmark. So we're about 25 or 30 employees altogether. But we still have about 3 million specimens in the collections, so we're not many people, but we're lots of dead animals. And we're doing this project together with the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin. Maybe this one you've probably heard about. Maybe you've been there, because they have dinosaurs. Everybody loves dinosaurs, right? Does any of you not like dinosaurs? All right. So everyone will be sorry now, because this is when the dinosaurs went extinct. So 65 million years ago, you all know this, so I'm going to be very brief. Sorry for my funny accent. I work with dead animals in the basement, and don't let me out that much, so now I have to talk to humans. It's very new. So 65 million years ago, a giant meteorite hit Earth. Everything, 70% of the landmass of North America burned, and there were kilometer-high tsunamis washing over entire islands, and the climate changed, and all animals larger than a cat that were terrestrial, living on the ground, they vanished within a few short time span. So we all know this. This was what we call a biodiversity crisis or global extinction. You all know, right? So what most people, you know this, but what most people don't know is that right now, animals are going extinct at a rate way faster than 65 million years ago. Because of this, because of us. And as a natural history museum, our goal, our mission is to educate people on the biodiversity crisis. We consider now maybe ourselves not as much as a museum, but more as a biodiversity center or something. So we want to engage people and educate people in the biodiversity crisis, extinction of species, and we want people to take actions. So not only tell them information, this is that species and that species, but we want people to go out and do something active to prevent the further loss of species. So we know that all these species are going extinct. And where we have our information from, the knowledge, the data, is from the collections, right? Everyone knows this. So this is an entomology collection, and entomology is the study of insects, right? So each of these drawers look a bit like this. Lots of insects on small pins. And every specimen, like I said, we're a tiny museum, we have only 5,000 or 3,000 specimens in our collection. Each specimen has a tiny label with information on it, and that is the core data that we work with. And to educate people and engage people and to take actions in the biodiversity crisis, we need that information to be digitally accessible. So when this guy collected this butterfly 100 years ago, he had no clue about the internet. So it's all stored in handwritten labels. So I like this slide. I always show this slide. So this is what we do. We take the analog information and we digitize it, and we publish it online to Global Biodiversity Facility, all these online open access databases. And because we're such a tiny museum with very few people and lots of specimens, we have for the last 5 or 10 years or so been doing various pilot studies to engage volunteers in digitizing, transcribing the specimen label data. So the first study was by mollusks, that is seashells and snails, cones, etc. So we had volunteers repackage and digitize and label about 40,000 specimens within 1 year. So we thought, oh, this might be a good idea, because if I had to do it, I would never have the time for it. So these were volunteers that showed up physically at the museum. We had another project that we tried on Suniverse. Mia? There you are. You told about Suniverse earlier. So we had an online digital citizen science project. We had 5,000 specimens transcribed in 5 days. So that's another great success for us. Maybe 5,000 is not impress you, but considering we're so few people, I was really impressed. So we decided we want to take this, what you call it, one step further. And how can we be very ambitious in engaging volunteers in transcribing specimen data? So we set up in the entomology department. We hired one guy to be supervisor for volunteers. So for a very small museum with very few employees, hiring one extra guy was a struggle, a fight. But we decided this was important to get all the specimens digitized. Because if the data is not available, then we shouldn't have collected the specimen, really. And it's like a book no one reads. Why keep the book? So we want to make the information accessible. And we're doing this in collaboration with Berlin. They have another project for years with people transcribing archived materials. So and having volunteers is nothing new for museums, and maybe some of you have volunteers as well. But the way I see it is, my experience is that most museums, when you have volunteers, you have one curator, and he has 2 or 3 volunteers stopping by once in a while. You're like, we want 100 volunteers, 200 volunteers. We want them to be at every workstation from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So how can we do this? So we had to reinvent how we manage the volunteers. So to set up a project like this, we had to do a lot of preparing. So we had to define the goal of the project to see if this is realistic. So we decided we want to have at least 150,000 specimens transcribed digitally in 3 years. So 50,000 specimens a year. And transcribing specimens is not the only task. There are numerous tasks within that. So we have to find the specimens, we have to handle every specimen. So this is a project that demands the physical presence of people at the museum. So we need to have the workstations going, we need to have the what's called collection management system. We use this program called Specify, maybe you've heard of it. We need to have that ready for volunteers, so we made up a simplified data entry platform that only has the information boxes that are necessary for this project. And we need to have budgets for the supervisor, etc. And then if you want to set up volunteering programs, we found out that it was very important to have sort of an agreement on the minimum number of volunteers necessary to reach your goals. Because if you set up a system and you want to digitize 1 million specimens and you have 4 volunteers, it's not cost effective to hire one supervisor to manage 4 volunteers. And there's also a maximum number of volunteers that you can manage if you're just one guy. So you need to kind of reflect on the numbers of volunteers that you have the room for and the capacity and the budget for. And to make this project like a part of the organization, there's a lot of things you need to do. So obviously you're going to need insurance if someone breaks something or they fall down a ladder or whatever. And we need to have volunteer contracts with contact information, etc., etc. But the most important thing is this clear line of communication is rather important with volunteers. So you don't have one employee approaching a volunteer and say, you're doing this wrong, or can you please help with this instead? So you have to go through the supervisor of the volunteers for communication. But should have been there. What I find important is that the overall mission of the organization, having volunteers is a part of the mission. So, like I said, we're very concerned about the loss of biodiversity, and our mission is to educate and engage people in save the whales. That's why I put on this very special T-shirt. And having volunteers, they act as ambassadors. So as a museum, we spend a lot of money building exhibitions, telling people the mission, right? And we do research papers that people read, and they absorb whatever we want them to do. And having volunteers, they act as ambassadors for that. So you're working as a volunteer at the museum, and then on your spare time, friends ask you what you're doing. You tell about the museum and the loss of biodiversity. And then you're kind of the extended arm of the museum outreach. Does that make sense? Okay, didn't to me, but good. And you need a lot of training. Managing volunteers is not something, it's a specialized task as everything else, so you need training, especially for, I was told, for conflict handling. So when you're not sure about what you should do, if you complain too much, etc. And to really get it going, when you have a large group of volunteers, you need to train the volunteers. And you have 100 volunteers, you cannot go, let's say, one-on-one training. You need to set up some training sessions, etc. And this all needs to be prepared before you start the project. Because if you start a project with volunteers and you're sort of inventing as you go along, you lose the motivation and you lose the volunteers. And we asked the volunteers, and they did so in Berlin as well, so why do you take part of this? Because honestly, don't tell anyone. Transcribing specimen label data is a bit of boring. But people say, all the volunteers say that they want to make something that is worthwhile. For them, it's a good thing to do. It's what you call it, altruistic. So they participate and spend a lot of time just because they want to do something good. So that means we have to treat them very good as well. They do that, and most of our volunteers have some kind of interest in nature. So they go hunting, fishing, they are amateur entomologists, retired biology teachers or something. And we want to have volunteers to have the data. We want results, right? We want the data to be digital and to be published online. But like I said, we also wanted the public to engage in the museum mission. And when we tell the volunteers that you're actually making a difference, you're doing an impact on, you're directly, participating in current research. So the data you transcribe today can be used in research tomorrow. So you're making a difference for the world society and nature. And the volunteers tend to be very proud. They're like, I'm making a difference, you know. So they're very committed, and they stay for a long time once they've started on the project, which is very good, so we don't have to waste a lot of time and money on training them. And we decided that in the old days, when we had volunteers, they were kind of friends of the curator, and we didn't have any recruitment. Someone asked to be a volunteer, and like, yeah, sure, you're most welcome. But now, when we set up this program, we saw the volunteers as hired staff, except they were not paid. So we put out a job advert, and they have to go through they have to send in what's the English word, application, and we have interviews. And when we have interviews to sort out the people who are not really dedicated, and for the volunteers to decide if this is something they really want to do. So you don't want volunteers that after a month never comes back. It's not a dignified treatment of them or of your time. And then we had adverts in Facebook, museum homepage, newsletters, I think some newspapers as well. And the point here is it's okay to say no. So you don't need to accept all the volunteers. Most people find it very difficult to say no. You want to participate, but for some reason you don't fit in with the group or the tasks or whatever, so maybe welcome next time. So the results is that so far we have transcribed more than 50,000 specimens a year, and we have this very large group of volunteers that they don't only take part in the transcribing, digitisation process, but when we have a reception, opening of a new exhibition, they come and help with serving champagne and everything else. So we have a large group of volunteers hang around that work as, like I said before, kind of ambassadors for the museum and the mission we have. And I think that is, for me, that's very worthwhile paying the one supervisor's salary for. So we've paid a little amount of money and we've just gained so much momentum in the local society and for the museum mission. And I have no idea if I was on time, but that's the last one.
Okay, excellent. Now we have 15 minutes until lunch, so we can really ask some questions. Is there any question from the audience first? If somebody, please raise hand. Yeah?
Hello, thank you to both our presenters for your excellent contributions. My question is for the Aarhus Museum. So I was very interested in your volunteer project. I have two questions. The first is, so you mentioned you do interviews for essentially quality control coming in. Do you also check their work after to if there's mistakes, or how relevant is that for your archival work? And my second question is, as our AI tools continue to develop, they've gotten better and better at, for example, reading handwriting. Can that be incorporated in your archival work of reading these small handwritten labels?
Okay, yes. So for this project, we've chosen the entomology specimens, the pinned insects, because they cannot be machine read, because you have the butterfly or whatever and a pin, and there's a label beneath it. So in order to read it, you have to physically lift it and look under it. If you have to digitize it in a machine process, you have to remove the labels, and it's more complicated. So that's why we chose for the entomology to have people being physically present at the museum to make it. So they're transcribing it, so for this process we're not using OCR or anything on the labels. They just type what they read. And in order to make that process faster, we uploaded lots and lots of data. So when you start entering the Latin name of a species, all the taxonomy, the names of all the species, have been uploaded in the list. So you just type in like a fuzzy search, the first 3 letters, and you click the name. And I uploaded a list of all the known locality names from Denmark, 200,000 or so, with GPS, latitude, longitude. So you type in the first locality names, and you choose from a list. So in that way, you minimize the risk of errors. And by typing in directly into the collection management system, you avoid the problems you will have when you type in Excel spreadsheet. So the system doesn't recognize a date format if it's the wrong format. So you cannot have the 4th of the 11th or the 20th month or whatever. It doesn't recognize it. So it has an inbuilt way of finding errors. So we spend now less time finding errors, checking over the data, than when we had people typing into Excel spreadsheets or whatever. Did that answer one question? Yeah. What was the other question? No. Did you have other questions?
That was it.
Oh, I'm just talking. Yeah, sorry.
Is there another question? No?
Huh? For you, Hans, whilst you stood up, I'm interested to know if you had any professional pushback from the work that you did with your participants, or was it all plain sailing? And if there was, how did you navigate those tensions?
What do you mean by pushback?
So some professionals consider that data that originates from community participants is less valid than professional derived data. I'm speaking particularly from my field. It might be different in yours.
Yeah. So from the biodiversity specimens, the data is very different from an bones of a whale than they are to entomology specimens. And we choose the entomology because they have the taxonomy, the species and locality and the date it was collected and the name of the guy who collected it. So there's very little interpretation. So it's very basic data. That's why we choose this project. For other specimens, we have expedition diaries, field notes, etc. And those can be interpreted in a number of ways. So we choose the collection that has the data, the information that is most applicable for being standardized.
I see. And is this something that perhaps you will develop in future, go into those more interpretive works on the basis of this that you've just done?
Yes, we will look into that. For now, we have entomology for the next 20 years or so, but we're still looking into how to improve the workflow.
Great. I look forward to that presentation in 20 years.
So,
Hey, good morning. First of all, thank you for the presentations. It was really, really good. But my question is to Hans. And actually, thank you for your presentation. For all questions that I start writing, you just answer them right away. But then my question is not in the technical part, it's more in terms of people. Because you were working with volunteers, and I think we all know how difficult it is working with volunteers and to get people to volunteer to work. And you showed the whole process that is really, really good and clear to understand. But how many people you have, for example, in this last project? How many volunteers you got?
I think now we have about 70 or so, between 50 and 100. So one volunteer, they show up 3 or 4 times a week, and others, they come by once in a month. So the way we count the visitors are by how many people are active a month or a week. So we have 5 or 6 people a week at minimum who participate in this project. So it can be the same guy sitting there all day, or it can be 5 different people. It doesn't matter.
Interesting. Another question? Something online?
Nothing online, but I have a question.
Okay.
Hi, thank you both so much. This is not from the audience, but hi to everyone listening online. I was wondering, I really liked, a word struck me about the volunteers, about motivation, and I was wondering, and also related to Eva, also for the community archives, as time changes, as we are becoming maybe less young, how do you think how people participate in community archiving and are interested in engaging with institutions will be changing, for example, in that sort of preservation and sort of crowdsourcing and sort of sharing our own knowledge and giving that time? How do you think that might change over time? How can we work against those trends or engage younger people? I wonder also if you have examples of, engaging schools and maybe the community art. I think it's a different context for community archives also because there's an intrinsic motivation maybe coming from those people involved. But I just wonder if you have any responses to this question.
Okay, so in Aarhus, we see that we have the volunteers in like 2 groups. So one group are the people who have gone on retirement, and then the other group are like biology students. And they have different motivational factors. So the senior people want to just do something valuable with their time, whereas the students maybe are more focused on getting something on their resume. So they've been participating in research at a museum, but they still do the same thing. So the different groups of people have very different motivational factors, and you have to consider that when you apply them to different tasks.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.